Deep Sea Embers Chapter 441 to 445. Tyrion made his way into the designated meeting location, immediately noting that it lacked the usual trappings of the lavish, high society venues he was accustomed to. The absence of the soft strains of classical music was glaring, making the atmosphere feel less refined. Rather than an opulent banquet hall, the meeting was taking place in a visitor's lounge under the jurisdiction of the Port Authority. He recognized a few familiar faces among the military representatives waiting for him, people he had crossed paths with in various capacities over the years. As Tyrion entered, General Lister, the commander of the defense forces, stood up to greet him. Extending his hand, Lister offered an apologetic expression and said, "I regret that we couldn't arrange a more sumptuous setting for this meeting. Given the urgency and short notice, this was the best we could do." For a moment, Tyrion held back from accepting Lister's handshake. Instead, he took a moment to observe the room. Several stern-faced officers in Frost Navy uniforms stood in a disciplined formation behind Lister, showing remarkable composure. But the rest of the people in the room, support staff and other military personnel, appeared visibly tense. Some cast surreptitious glances at the newcomers, while others seemed to be forcing their gaze elsewhere, maintaining a veneer of uneasy calm. The underlying fatigue in their eyes was, however, impossible to hide. Breaking into a chuckle, Tyrion finally reached out to shake Lister's hand. "You needn't worry. Had you gone to the lengths of organizing a grand feast complete with noisy violinists, it would have defeated the purpose of our discussion." Lister felt the powerful grip of Tyrion's handshake and quickly withdrew his own hand. A slight flush appeared on his face as he replied, "It seems you have some preconceived notions about us. But let's be clear, Frost Navy of today is as committed to defending our city-state as you were in your time. Our allegiances may differ, but our resolve does not." "I'm well aware, General," Tyrion responded, flashing a wry smile. His eyes briefly scanned Lister's uniform, lingering momentarily on the badge that bore his rank of General. He shook his head slightly and began walking toward the center of the room. "Enough with the formalities. We both understand the gravity of the current situation. Let's move on to the matters at hand, our city, its future, and if you dare to venture there, the topic of my father." Lister sank into a sofa, visibly tensing at the mention of Tyrion's father. He was instantly reminded of a cataclysmic event that had indelibly marked the psyche of every resident of Frost. A gigantic figure materializing from another dimension, its eyes like twin suns, obliterating the mirror city with a simple wave of its hand. Suppressing a shiver that seemed to emanate from the core of his being, Lister struggled to refocus his attention on Tyrion, who was now seated across from him. "So, it truly was your father, the entity that emerged from subspace," he stammered, his voice tinged with a growing sense of dread. Up until this point, no one had ever seen him make such a move. His form was completely unfamiliar. Tyrion shrugged nonchalantly. "From this point forward, it will be documented. Congratulations, General Lister. Frost will have the dubious honor of being the first city-state to bear witness to, and officially record, this event." Pausing for a moment, Tyrion looked at Lister intently as if probing for something deeper. "I have to ask, what's the general sentiment in the city right now? How are your people coping with everything that's happened?" Lister let out a heavy sigh before responding, "The atmosphere is thick with tension and fear. It's been a difficult night for everyone, to put it mildly. Though the disaster has come to an end, the way it concluded has left most people utterly bewildered and frightened. There's a lot of speculation regarding the mysterious entity that appeared over the sea. But honestly, I think if the public truly understood what it was, the ensuing panic might be even worse. We at City Hall took quite some time piecing together various bits of information before daring to conjecture that the entity might be your father. Forgive our slowness, but what we witnessed was so shocking that it would leave anyone hesitating." Tyrion's face assumed a complex expression as he sighed. "I can understand that. I wasn't given any prior notice either. I was as shocked as you were when it all happened." Lister observed Tyrion with a mixture of acute curiosity and unease as if he were a riddle begging to be solved. He couldn't help but wonder how Tyrion, referred to by many as Duncan's son, interacted with his enigmatic father. What had led them to intervene in Frost's situation? How did this powerful figure, who had returned from another dimension, perceive the world now. Unable to contain his curiosity any longer, Lister asked, "There are rumors suggesting your father has regained his humanity. Is there any truth to that?" A look of surprise crossed Tyrion's face. "What makes you think he lacks humanity?" Images of the colossal titan and the devastating scene where a city was reduced to ashes and dust at the swipe of his hand filled Lister's mind. He opened his mouth, tempted to voice his simmering doubts and accusations, but found himself unable to articulate them. Finally, Lister managed to say, "I believe, his actions suggest he possesses a human heart now, despite everything." A chuckle escaped Tyrion's lips. "I get the sense that you truly believe what you're saying." Picking up a glass of red wine from the small table between them, Tyrion raised it high. "To mutual trust, then." Lister lifted his own glass, though his smile was forced and his mind clearly preoccupied. They toasted and sipped their wine. Setting his glass down, Lister ventured another question, "May I ask what you and your father plan to do next?" Tyrion replied without any trace of evasion, "I really don't know." This stunned Lister. "You don't know?" Tyrion spread his hands in a gesture of benign uncertainty, yet his eyes sparkled with an emotion that looked suspiciously like delight. "He hasn't told me. I've been outsmarting Frost Navy for decades, but this is the first friendly chat that's given me so much pleasure. I came here solely because my father commanded it, and to defend a city once protected by Queen Rhaenora. What comes next is entirely up to him." Finally, Lister asked almost reflexively, "Is there a way for us to communicate with your father?" Tyrion's eyebrows shot up, and his tone wavered between earnestness and jest. "You're truly interested in contacting him? Well, in that case, allow me to tell you about a certain ritual." Actually, let's forget I mentioned it." Lister quickly backtracked, his posture tensing up as he made a dismissing gesture with his hand. It was merely a passing thought. When one speaks of him, casual remarks are perhaps not the wisest course of action. You never know when he might decide to turn his attention your way, Tyrion responded, his face momentarily clouding as if he was recalling an uncomfortable experience. He shook his head and chuckled, looking back at Lister. "Don't worry, I'm just teasing. Everyone here is so on edge. Isn't this the Mist Fleet's first homecoming in 5 decades? Shouldn't we treat this as more of a family reunion?" A subtle flicker of discomfort crossed Lister's face at Tyrion's suggestion, but he swiftly composed himself. His face became serious again. "Admiral Tyrion, let's cut to the chase. Frost is facing a precarious situation." "Yes, I'm aware. We've just dealt with it. You misunderstand. I'm not referring to the recent Phantom invasion. That was a catastrophe, not just a problem. Now that it's over, we have to brace for a slew of subsequent challenges. The social order here in Frost is on the verge of collapsing. Beyond surviving tonight, we have an array of issues to address: public safety, provision of essential goods, maritime security." Tyrion leaned back, his face impassive. "What does that have to do with me? I'm an outlaw, a pirate. Managing a city isn't in my wheelhouse." Lister looked momentarily deflated by Tyrion's indifference, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. Before he could find them, a rhythmic series of knocks sounded at the door. The door swung open to reveal a man who epitomized refinement. Dressed in a meticulously tailored suit, with impeccably styled hair and sporting gold-rimmed glasses, he stepped into the room. "I hope I'm not intruding," the well-dressed man greeted, offering a congenial smile as he bowed slightly to both Tyrion and Lister. "May I join you?" Mr. Secretary," Tyrion appraised the newcomer for a moment, his eyes twinkling with recognition. "I remember those glasses and that hairstyle." Lister, his attention redirected, queried urgently, "Is there any news from City Hall?" The secretary nodded discreetly. "Indeed, I bring updates from City Hall." At this, Tyrion interjected, "Before we proceed, let it be known that I have little interest in the resolutions of your city's governing body. After all, we're rebels, so." He was cut off by the secretary, who smoothly slid a document across the coffee table towards him, locking eyes with Tyrion as he did so. "Would you consider another possibility?" He paused, then pushed the document closer to Tyrion and spoke softly. "Governor Tyrion has arrived in Frost, the land to which he once pledged loyalty. The implication was heavy, hanging in the air like a tangible thing. It was a reminder, a prompt, and perhaps even an offer. The room went quiet, all eyes on Tyrion, awaiting his response. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Tyrion slowly raised his head, allowing his eye to focus intently on the secretary standing before him. His face bore a look that clearly communicated, "Do you think you can play games with me?" The most formidable and legendary pirate from the frigid waters of the Cold Sea had only ever exhibited such a deeply surprised look once before, and that was in the presence of his father. He did not lay a hand on the several documents that the man had slid over to him. Instead, after taking a moment to collect himself, he shifted his gaze to meet that of General Lister, who was seated across from him. The deep shock evident in the general's eyes seemed to reflect Tyrion's own sentiments. "This seems to be truly unexpected information," Tyrion whispered, maintaining an even tone. "It seems even the general before me was kept in the dark about this plan. Because this isn't some pre-established plan," the secretary said, adjusting his gleaming gold-framed glasses. He maintained a serious demeanor as he continued, "Our current circumstances in Frost are complicated, and we don't have the luxury to deeply debate every possible action before we set it into motion. That's why I've brought this proposal directly here, to discuss its viability with General Lister as a witness." Viability. Do you genuinely believe this plan holds water? Tyrion almost burst into laughter, looking at the secretary as though he had completely lost his mind. "I lead the Mist Fleet. I'm the most notorious pirate in the Cold Sea. The very source of countless horror tales told in Frost for the last 5 decades. And now, you propose that I become the ruler of this city. Just because we fought alongside one another doesn't mean you fully understand the nature of our alliance." "Yes, we did fight side by side," the secretary confirmed. "Together, we fended off a threat that could have spelled doom for the city-state. By now, many are aware that the Mist Fleet stepped in at the 11th hour, defending the city in collaboration with the Navy. By tomorrow, the entirety of Frost will know this, and the city's authorities will communicate to the citizens that the Mist Fleet's departure 50 years ago was just a temporary divergence. They'll say the Iron Admiral, who left in anger, never truly renounced his commitment to safeguarding the city-state." He paused briefly, ensuring Tyrion wasn't going to cut him off, then continued, "Every situation can be reinterpreted, every shift can be justified. You might believe such a drastic change won't sit well with Frost's inhabitants, but the reality is, a majority of the common folks can easily alter their original perspectives when faced with persistent and singularly directed propaganda. The promise of a stable life and marked improvements in order will soon overshadow any past grievances. The way people perceive things can be molded. It's just a matter of time." Tyrion listened carefully, his demeanor unchanging, eyes fixed on the secretary. "You seem to have quite the knack for this. Every city-state, including Frost during the Queen's reign, practices this," replied the secretary expressionlessly. "Creating a narrative that resonates with the current societal mood can ease the mental stress of the majority. This isn't an evil act. True wickedness lies in voicing noble promises but failing to preserve social stability or ensure the populace's well-being." The secretary, trying to catch Captain Tyrion's attention, started, "Captain Tyrion, you must understand something. The primary aim of City Hall isn't to mete out justice but to ensure the maximum number of our people make it through these trying times." Tyrion sighed deeply. "She used to echo those exact sentiments too," he muttered. The secretary nodded. "Yes, her words still resonate as they're engraved upon the very doors of our domed office. Remember, it was the Frost Queen we deposed, not the fundamental truths and principles she stood by." A heavy silence settled as Tyrion paused, seemingly absorbed in introspection. After what felt like a long pause, he finally found his voice. "Why do you feel that I am the right fit for this leadership role?" "Well, the initial idea came from Miss Agatha. She believed that you and your formidable Mist Fleet could be instrumental in restoring stability to the city-state. However, the detailed decision was derived from a crucial emergency session held at City Hall," the secretary elaborated, adjusting his posture. "I'll be frank, I have my reservations about whether you're truly the best choice for this. My colleagues, though, remind me that before earning the title of pirate, you served as one of Frost's most esteemed admirals. Historically, nearly 1 in 3 of our city's rulers or governors has had a military background. Tyrion frowned, shaking his head. You're condensing a complex issue into a simplistic narrative. It's not solely about finding the ideal candidate. We're grappling with a myriad of historical complexities. While you've pointed out that it's possible to steer public opinion, such endeavors demand time. Time that Frost is running short of. To re-establish order swiftly, perhaps you should. Before Tyrion could finish, the secretary raised his hand, cutting him off. Captain Tyrion, before you dismiss the idea, I'd advise you to go through the documents I've presented. They might offer you some insights into the practicability of this entire situation. Surprised by the secretary's assertion, Tyrion finally shifted his gaze to the plain-looking files the man had laid out earlier. The materials were simple and straightforward, stripped of any ornate emblems or elaborate decorations. Just modestly crafted, factual proposals. As Tyrion skimmed through, a mix of shock and realization transformed his features. Closing the folder with a definitive snap, he locked eyes with the secretary. The secretary, maintaining an aura of serenity, slightly nodded before Tyrion could voice his thoughts. To put it concisely, he began. First, the catastrophic disaster that befell Frost was orchestrated by the Annihilators. But, the real cause is rooted in the hazardous mining operations the old city hall permitted beneath our city for decades. The blatant disregard for safety in those shadowy depths, coupled with their decision to turn a blind eye to, or even deliberately hide, alarming signs, escalated the crisis. Second, numerous past governors were fully aware of these mining malpractices, but due to their personal interests, chose to veil the truth. Third, the primary reason your mist fleet severed ties with Frost half a century ago relates to disagreements about these illicit mining practices and the consequent impending catastrophe. And lastly, subsequent governors systematically tarnished the reputation of the Mist Fleet. They veiled the genuine discord between the fleet and the city, directing the populace's animosity towards you, Admiral Tyrion, diverting their focus from the real issue, the mines. Furthermore, the secretary added, extending his fifth point, Governor Winston wasn't just under mild speculation. There were glaring signs pointing towards his alliance with the followers of annihilation. Right before the disaster took the city by surprise, he was alerted but chose inaction over preparation. His decision wasn't simply negligent, it was outright treacherous. He abandoned the city he was sworn to protect and is now counted among its greatest adversaries. It's believed he has integrated with the followers of annihilation, and Frost will forever seek retribution for his betrayal. Moreover, he pressed on to his sixth point, the newly instated governor will not only oversee the city's restoration. Immediate probes into the mining operations will be initiated, and for those accountable who remain, justice will be swift and inescapable. Throughout the secretary's revelation, Tyrion remained unmoved. His stillness, combined with his piercing gaze, made the room's atmosphere dense, almost choking. Yet, undeterred by the intensity in the room, the secretary reached into his briefcase, producing another sizable stack of documents. This, he began, emphasizing each word, is an exhaustive catalog. The beginning segments carry concrete proof, detailing unauthorized mining activities, blatant disregard for safety signs, and systemic efforts to tarnish the Mist Fleet's reputation. As of now, we have a summarized version, but rest assured, in 3 days, every piece of evidence will be collated. He paused momentarily, adjusting the documents in front of him. The latter part focuses on a directory of individuals who are liable to be apprehended and subjected to trial. Each person, aside from their primary offenses, will also be indicted for associating with the followers of annihilation. Think of them as city halls, insurance, against unforeseen disruptions. To crown it all, he said, revealing the last set of documents, here, we have letters and personal journals that cement Governor Winston's allegiance with the followers of annihilation. Some of them even bear his unmistakable signature. Without touching the proffered evidence, Tyrion's expression grew colder, if possible. The room's temperature seemed to dip further, the mist thickening and every exhaled breath materializing into misty clouds. The question he posed next was measured: who is the mastermind behind these documents? The secretary, showing no hint of anxiety, replied, previous governors have had a hand in their making. Each administration curates such a collection, keeping in mind possible future scenarios. They aren't tailored exclusively for you but for any potential successors or emerging threats. The last set, surprisingly, is Governor Winston's creation. Interestingly, he, too, saw potential in collaborating with the Mist Fleet, aligning with Miss Agatha's earlier proposition. The layer of frost on the table grew thicker as Tyrion slowly placed his hand atop the documents. Looking directly into the secretary's unwavering eyes, he murmured, so these papers ascertain Winston's culpability. Nodding gently, the secretary responded, in Frost, we've always believed in the natural order of things, the past yielding to the present. Admiral Tyrion, though you may not be originally from Frost, this principle should resonate with you. If framing Governor Winston and the previous administration's aids in the rapid stabilization of the city, I'm convinced they, along with all their predecessors, would find it a necessary sacrifice. The atmosphere in the room, which had been frigid and tense, eased slightly. The warmth offered a brief relief to those who had been shivering from the cold. Despite the room's growing comfort, Admiral Tyrion remained indifferent and aloof to the secretary's string of proposed solutions. He seemed lost in thought, staring contemplatively at the assortment of objects spread out on the table in front of him as though he were pondering the weight of a century's worth of history. Finally, Tyrion broke the suffocating silence that seemed ready to engulf everyone in the room. Maintaining order is a wise course of action, he mused, something that must have been particularly valuable 50 years ago. The secretary met his gaze directly. You have to remember the state of disarray Frost was in during that time. Strong leaders make monumental achievements, but they can also make catastrophic errors. Sometimes, unpleasant actions must be taken to maintain control. I've done my homework, Admiral Tyrion. I have great respect for Queen Rhaenora. But even she couldn't erase the disastrous aftermath of the Abyss Project. Tyrion responded in a measured tone, you may have studied history, but I have lived it. Both of us understand what was at stake back then. I hold no grudges. From an objective standpoint, you've kept Frost stable for the past 50 years. The secretary seemed to visibly relax, his tense posture softening ever so slightly. Seizing the moment, he leaned in and started, so, you're saying you agree. However, Tyrion didn't say anything. Instead, he placed his hand atop the stack of documents on the table and applied slight pressure. A cold energy radiated through his hand, freezing the paper until tiny ice crystals formed and shattered with a rustling noise. The documents, which had the potential to alter the course of history, disintegrated into worthless fragments. The secretary's eyes widened in shock, and General Lister, who had remained mostly silent throughout the conversation, couldn't suppress a quiet gasp. You are. I'm not interested in these, Tyrion interrupted, lifting his head to look squarely at those gathered in the room. I want the authentic records, specific details about the mine disaster, how exactly the cult infiltrated the city-state, who should be held responsible, who shouldn't, and the true actions of Governor Winston. I want first-hand information, not sugar-coated reports aimed at quickly restoring order. This is essential if we are to truly take control of the situation. Caught off guard, the secretary quickly regrouped. So you're accepting Frost's invitation, then. However, let me be blunt, you will still need the kind of documents that were just destroyed. Genuine information is important, but so is managing public perception. He hesitated briefly as if contemplating the gravity of his next words. The city will face extreme challenges in the near future. Several infrastructure projects will likely be delayed, and due to the pollution from the muck, we will experience fuel shortages. Food distribution will become problematic, security will deteriorate, and public unrest will inevitably rise. Diverting the public's attention toward the failures of the previous government may be our most effective strategy. Tyrion spoke with such conviction and authority that the room was immediately captivated. When fuel becomes scarce, we'll turn to our reserves. If that's insufficient, I'll devise an alternative plan. If food distribution turns chaotic, we'll implement strict oversight and enforce severe punishments for violations. Rationing will be put in place, not just in the lower parts of the city, but in the affluent upper city as well. Should public security deteriorate, we will institute temporary military rule. People require a concrete target for their frustrations and anger. So let's give them one by genuinely going after the cultists, the subversives, those who are truly at fault. His words resonated with an undeniable force, commanding the respect and attention of everyone present. The room plunged into an almost sacred silence, so quiet that the breaths of those gathered became audible. The secretary, usually a picture of grace and tact, seemed momentarily thrown off balance, uncertain how to respond to Tyrion's unyielding declaration. Tyrion looked around the room, breaking into a composed smile and gently shaking his head. I'm not dismissing your efforts or solutions. Given your limitations and the knowledge you had, you made the best choices available at that time. But times have changed. I have no intention of merely repeating the last 50 years. Mr. Secretary, the Mist Fleet operates differently. It's time to aim higher. Finally regaining his composure, the secretary adjusted his posture and looked at Tyrion with eyes ablaze with intense curiosity. Can you truly accomplish all that you've suggested? As long as the remnants of City Hall cooperate to their fullest extent, Tyrion paused, grinning playfully, and as for the rest, Mr. Secretary, do you know who maintains the most stringent order in the boundless sea? The most stringent order. The secretary seemed puzzled, thrown off by the question. Would it be the city-state navy? Or perhaps the overseas merchant fleets? No, it's the pirates, the great pirates of the cold sea, Tyrion said, chuckling. The city-state navy has the benefit of stable ports and safe harbors. The merchant fleets have the protection of the church and navy escorts. But the pirates, against the backdrop of the boundless sea, can only rely on rigorous discipline and order to survive. The secretary fell silent, visibly unsure how to engage with this unconventional perspective, which seemed far beyond the realm of his usual professional responsibilities. Recognizing this, Tyrion laughed and patted the secretary on the shoulder. Relax, Mr. Secretary. The situation is more manageable now than it was 50 years ago. I have numerous trade partners who will be willing to assist us once they understand our predicament. You need not worry too much about maintaining worldly order. He then paused, his gaze shifting to the window. Outside, the deep night had enveloped the city. Gas lamps created a serpentine dance of light around the port. The snow had stopped, the clouds had parted, and the cold, ethereal light of the moon bathed everything in a celestial glow. Under this heavenly illumination, the city rested in a rare moment of peace. As for matters that go beyond worldly concerns, Tyrion hesitated briefly before continuing in an eerie tone that sent shivers down the spines of those present. I believe my father will find a way. General Lister, who had been mostly quiet until now, felt compelled to speak. He referred to Tyrion's father with an almost reverent he, asking, is he still watching over Frost? Where is he now? A series of detailed answers sprung to Tyrion's mind. He could vividly picture his father standing by a window on the second floor of a house at 44 Oak Street, a property rented from the city's Citizen Service Center. But he hesitated and chose not to disclose this information. After all, the people of Frost, represented by the individuals in the room, were still in the dark about his father's current presence in the city. Revealing this information without his father's express permission might earn him another paternal scolding, a hit to his pride and dignity that he, as someone on the cusp of leadership, could not afford. He's still very much involved, although I can't go into details, Tyrion finally said, artfully evasive. Let's just say he has his hands full and doesn't only communicate with me. General Lister seemed surprised for a moment but then nodded quickly. Ah, I see. That makes sense. What exactly he understood remained a mystery. Unable to curb his curiosity, the secretary ventured further. What does your father do in his free time? Suppressing an eye roll, Tyrion pondered how to answer. Ever since his father had re-emerged from whatever subspace he'd been in, veiled in enigma, how could anyone speculate about his daily activities? It's not like he was a retiree content with fishing or tending to a garden. Noticing Tyrion's subtle change in expression, the secretary quickly recalibrated. My apologies for overstepping. It's all right, Tyrion dismissed. For our mental well-being, perhaps it's best to avoid discussing him too much. Let's move on. He rose from the sofa and approached the expansive window overlooking the city. Street lamps still glowed in the distance. At intersections leading to various city districts, he could faintly discern the temporary barricades that had been erected during recent conflicts. By tomorrow, those barricades would be dismantled, and the people responsible for governing the city would begin their work to restore order. The constellation of lights from the far-off districts mirrored in Tyrion's eyes. It's been years since I last saw this city. It appears much remains the same. General Lister walked over, standing just behind Tyrion. But things are bound to change significantly starting today. 50 years ago, the last monarchists were expelled from this city, a new city hall was established by the rebels, and I became one of those rebels, Tyrion mused, staring out at the horizon filled with lights and silhouettes of buildings. Now, half a century later, I return to find the city almost exactly as I left it. It's like life has come full circle. Everything seems to have reverted back to the way it was. General Lister, what, then, was the point of the past 50 years? Lister was silent, evidently deep in thought. Meanwhile, the secretary walked over and gestured toward the window, his arm extending out to the illuminated city beyond. Admiral Tyrion, those lights, those lives, those unbroken cycles of history and struggle, they are the meaning of the past 50 years. As the gentle glow of dawn began to illuminate the sky, the mysterious structure known as Vision 001, which was encased within twin mystical runic circles, started to rise slowly from the faraway horizon. As morning's soft light continued to expand, a vast ghostly ship, seemingly lost on an endless and placid ocean, began to glow with a radiant luster. Far off, on the boundary where the sea met the sky, the city of Frost could be faintly seen. Its scars from past events and myriad tales of love and parting were all obscured at this distance, appearing as a blur that seemed to melt away under the warmth of the sun. Duncan was seated peacefully at the forwardmost part of the ship, the bow deck, with a fishing rod set up next to him. He observed the fishing line as it twinkled in the growing dawn light, occasionally lifting his eyes to the distant outline of Frost. Despite it being a time when most of the city was at peace, Duncan felt no need to split his attention between his and city avatar. Instead, he savored the uncommon serenity on the ship. Beside him, I was perched on a large wooden tub. On the lid of this tub was a pile of fries, a delicacy Duncan had brought back from Frost. These fries were distinct, seasoned with unique spices that gave them a mouth-watering aroma. I was clearly delighted, taking breaks between munching to glance at its fishing master and to gaze out at the boundless sea. Nearby, on a smaller wooden tub, sat Shirley, who seemed deeply engrossed in her writing. She looked as if she was confronting a challenging opponent. Dog, meanwhile, was resting comfortably beside her, his paws resting on a copy of Modern Geometry. Scattered around them were several sheets of paper, filled with notes and drawings. The entire setting filled Duncan with a sense of calm, and a smile crept onto his face. The weight he'd felt in his heart over the past days seemed to lift. However, this peace wasn't shared by all on deck. Why is it that Nina gets to enjoy a deep sleep below deck while I'm up here at the break of dawn finishing my homework? Grumbled Shirley, her face mirroring her vexation. If I'd known this would be the case, I might as well have stayed in the city. At least there, I could have gone for walks occasionally. Frost is currently far from a thriving city, Duncan replied calmly. Given the circumstances, living in the city won't be easy for a while. And quit your complaining about homework. You're the one who claimed a stray dog ate yours. Feeling slightly affronted, Shirley countered, then why doesn't Nina have to do hers? Duncan looked at her, it's evident to anyone that she's probably finished hers. Morris will give her a test later to assess how well she's been studying on her own. Nina isn't like you. She doesn't wait around for someone to push her. Feeling cornered, Shirley meekly said, could it be that I've finished mine too? Keeping a straight face, Duncan asked, how do you spell the plural of pebble? Caught off guard, Shirley admitted, I haven't learned that one yet. That was in your previous assignment, and you didn't even get past the second page. Caught in her lie, Shirley's face said it all. She let out a defeated sigh, dropped her head, and resumed her challenging task of mastering spelling. Duncan let out a light-hearted chuckle, a smile playing on his lips as he observed the peculiar sight beside him. The skeletal canine, affectionately named Dog, had its attention fully immersed in a draft paper. With a pencil delicately held between its bony paws, Dog was meticulously drawing guiding lines on the paper. Adjacent to him, the book he had been engrossed in was momentarily put aside, the pages bookmarked for later perusal. Feeling the weight of Duncan's observant eyes, Dog's spirit quivered, a ripple passing through his skeletal frame. Startled by this sudden sensation, his paw jerked, causing the pencil to stray from its intended path. "See, Captain." Dog stammered, a note of uncertainty in his voice. Torn between meeting Duncan's eyes and the instinctual dread of turning away, his skull oscillated in a hesitant motion. With a twinkle of intrigue in his eyes, Duncan reached out, affectionately patting the top of Dog's bony head. After a few thoughtful seconds, Duncan mused aloud, "You seem to be advancing quite swiftly in your studies. At this rate, I wouldn't be surprised if you could soon grasp the depth of Morris's lectures." Taken aback, Dog, with the ethereal glow of his hollow eyes fluctuating, responded, "Really? I just find all of this fascinating. Is there an issue with one progressing rapidly in their studies?" Duncan, pausing to reflect, eventually responded with a playful smirk, "Not at all. It's commendable to be eager to learn. With your rapid progress, the disparity in academic prowess between you and Shirley may not be as stark." Dog emitted a bemused sound of agreement. Meanwhile, Duncan let out a soft sigh, his attention drawn to his still fishing rod that hadn't moved an inch that morning. "Given the recent tumultuous events and the colossal battle that ensued, I suspect the local fish have been scared off." Duncan sighed with a hint of regret. He began to methodically pack away his fishing equipment, adding thoughtfully, "Such chaos tends to deter even the deep-sea creatures from approaching these parts." Catching onto Duncan's words, Shirley's curiosity got the better of her, prompting her to inquire, "Does that mean we're setting sail soon? And when do you plan on retrieving Mr. Morris and Sister Vanna from the city?" Pausing his activities, Duncan met Shirley's gaze. "Did I ever imply that everything in Frost was settled?" Caught off guard, Shirley retorted, "But haven't the primary issues been addressed? Plus, you even endorsed Mr. Tyrion for a position on the city council. I assumed you were entrusting him with the remaining responsibilities. While I do expect Tyrion to shoulder the city's challenges, there remain certain predicaments that even the Mist Fleet can't contend with," Duncan said, resuming his task. He added, rather cryptically, "Some situations necessitate a personal touch. Until those matters are settled, it would be unwise for the Vanished to wander too far from here." Shirley's confusion was evident. What sort of problems can't the Mist Fleet handle? With a profound look, Duncan replied, "Ever wondered about the origins of the Mirror Frost?" Pensively, Shirley offered, "Wasn't it invoked by those cultists from the spiritual abyss of the deep sea?" Close, Duncan acknowledged, "It was indeed conjured from the spiritual deep sea realm. All the menaces we've eliminated thus far, including the ominous sacrificial grounds within the Mirror Frost, are fundamentally entities that have been summoned. And where there's a summoning, there must always be a source." Realization dawning upon her, Shirley's eyes widened in shock and disbelief. "You're suggesting that there's a deeper, lurking entity beneath the sea?" she stammered. Duncan nodded gravely, "Indeed. Based on my analysis," he began in a deliberate tone, "everything we've encountered on the surface, be it the deceptive replicas or the Mirror Frost itself, merely represents the manifestation of a deeper power. It's akin to a vast plant stretching towards the sunlight. In the cataclysmic conflict in Frost, we merely severed the sprawling, rampant crown of this metaphorical plant. Yet, its roots, deep and entrenched, persist." His gaze became piercing. "Remember, in ancient times, the Frost Queen dispatched multiple deep-sea submersibles, plunging into the abyss, just to barely graze the essence of that enigmatic entity in our reality. This force manifests physically within our oceans, just as palpably as it did within the mirrored realm." Shirley's reaction was immediate and impassioned. "Hold on. Does this mean we'll have to dive into the ocean's depths to confront this beast? Otherwise, isn't it inevitable that it will conjure another mirrored reflection of our city?" Duncan chuckled, shaking his head to reassure her, "It's not that imminent. Yes, while the entity remains, it's certainly been debilitated. The surface manifestations were essentially tendrils of its power, and I've incinerated a majority of them. What remains, now devoid of the cultists' ritualistic sustenance, is likely dormant. Even if we let it be, it might take decades, perhaps half a century, before it re-emerges as a threat. As Duncan spoke, he paused suddenly, extending a hand into the void. Don't you concur, Agatha? Emerging from thin air, a spectral, greenish flame ignited at Duncan's fingertips, swiftly blossoming into a vortex of fiery energy. Enveloped within this blaze, a sight appeared. A sightless priestess, donned in black, with a mask covering her eyes, stood in a stance reminiscent of prayer, her hands entwined in front of her. Both Shirley and Dog were spellbound by the unfolding scene. Agatha tilted her head upwards, her voice a mesmerizing and ghostly whisper, indeed. Those in the know would share our apprehensions regarding the Abyss plan. We've merely dismantled its superficial manifestation, yet lack the power to truly obliterate the underlying force nestled in the Abyss. We cannot simply wait decades for another calamity like the one in Frost to strike, Duncan added firmly. Every such conflict yields needless casualties. My intervention can't be the recurring answer. Pensively, Agatha remarked, Frost might lack the means to craft those deep-sea submersibles once more. Beyond the vessels, the requisite equipment, data, skilled workforce, and vital resources are beyond the capabilities of a Frost that's still healing. Duncan interjected, his tone decisive, then let's mobilize at the earliest. Have your council devise a strategy. In the worst case, craft an iron sarcophagus, primed to detonate within the abyss, housing a cadaver. Using this vessel, I can investigate the oceanic depths. Even though such a temporary embodiment holds limited might, once a stable conduit is fashioned, I should be capable of dispatching my flames to the ocean's floor. Listening carefully to Duncan's suggestion, Agatha's mind instantly flashed to the lifeless body that had temporarily served as her vessel for incarnation. With a subtle nod, she indicated that she had no objections to his proposal. I will certainly take that approach into consideration, she affirmed. Duncan hummed thoughtfully in reply. His gaze then shifted towards Agatha's form, which was projected through a glowing, fiery gateway. He scrutinized the indistinct and blurred background behind her before finally posing a casual question. So, how are things going on your end? Everything has been stabilizing at the cathedral, Agatha responded, her voice tinged with a note of relief. Today, we've been in touch with all the city's churches to evaluate our available manpower and to assess the losses we've incurred in the recent past. Just as you mentioned last night, the city-state had a peaceful night. No ominous shadows emerged from the darkness. Even the areas around the psychiatric hospital and graveyard, which are typically more prone to disturbances, remained stable. That's been a huge relief for me. If things continue in this manner, our troubles will be significantly reduced. Duncan raised an eyebrow, cutting through her update. I meant your personal well-being. How are you managing, especially given the intense workload in your current, unusual form? In all honesty, I don't feel tired, Agatha replied with a calm demeanor. Perhaps being in this corpse-like state has its own set of advantages for me. I don't experience fatigue or need rest in the way a living person does. As long as I can find solace in moments of prayer and reflection, I'll manage just fine. Are you currently in the cathedral's prayer room? Duncan inquired further. Yes, I'm situated in the main cathedral, specifically in the room that once belonged to Bishop Ivan. It's a peaceful space, Agatha added, her voice tinged with a hint of sadness as she looked around the room that was both familiar and special to her. Now, the room is solely my domain. At that moment, Duncan felt an unusual, almost unsettling sensation. After a few seconds of hesitation, he asked, Is Bartok comfortable with you contacting me from within the hallowed walls of the cathedral? Caught off guard, Agatha fell silent, as did Shirley and Dog who were nearby. Shirley quietly mumbled, Captain, how do you manage to think of such unique perspectives? And that question seemed peculiar. Duncan shot her a stern glance. Don't interrupt when adults are discussing important matters. You should use this time to focus on your homework. You haven't written a single word yet, have you? Resigned, Shirley returned her attention to her studies. Meanwhile, Agatha, who was still projected in the flame, regained her composure. She glanced curiously at the statue of the god of death situated not too far from her before refocusing her attention on Duncan. You know, I never thought about it, she finally said. Pausing to collect her thoughts, she posed a question. Have you ever asked Vanna a similar question while she's around you? What did she say? Duncan pondered the query, finding it quite valid. I've never really asked her. Perhaps I should do so the next time we talk. Agatha seemed as if she wanted to add something but ultimately remained silent. After a few awkward seconds, she deftly changed the subject. On another note, I'm prepared to evaluate the current situation in the metal mine. Really? Has the mine's environment stabilized? Duncan questioned, lifting an eyebrow. Last time we spoke, you mentioned it would take a few more days. The situation in the mine has largely stabilized. Going deeper still carries some inherent risks, but I'm not inclined to wait any longer, Agatha said, her expression turning solemn. The gravity of her resolve was unmistakable. I sense something drawing me into the depths, and this sensation has intensified since this morning. If we procrastinate any further, we might overlook something vital. Acknowledging her sentiment, Duncan nodded thoughtfully. Breaking the ensuing silence, he said, before you embark on this, meet me at 44 Oak Street. Caught off guard, Agatha's eyes widened. You're joining me. I'm quite intrigued by what might be hidden down there, Duncan admitted. Understood. I'll find you there before setting out, Agatha confirmed. Duncan gave another nod and with a flick of his hand, extinguished the flames that had been projecting Agatha's image. He sighed deeply and looked down at the fishing rod in his hands that dangled aimlessly. Well, fishing for nothing is also part of the journey, he mused. Turning to Shirley and Dog, who were lounging next to a wooden barrel, he instructed, I'll be in my room. Dog, make sure Shirley completes at least the first 5 pages of her vocabulary notebook. Once she finishes her homework, she's free to do as she pleases. Eager to obey, Dog sprang to his feet, wagging his skeletal tail enthusiastically until Duncan's figure disappeared up a nearby staircase. The shadowy hound then sank back into a more relaxed stance, but before lying down, he shot Shirley a stern look. Quit daydreaming and get writing. Oh, come on, Dog. You're such a nag, Shirley sighed, rubbing her cramping hand. I managed to keep a journal, and I don't even have fingers. The least you can do is write with your human hands, Dog retorted, settling down with an air of finality. Read more, learn more words, Shirley. Don't be hasty, the captain truly has your best interests at heart. You've always longed for a life like other kids have, haven't you? I can't give that to you, but the captain wants to. In his own way, he's looking out for you and Nina. You should realize how rare. Before he could finish his tirade, Shirley raised her hands in surrender. Okay, I get it. You're starting to sound like an overzealous caretaker, she groaned. Resigned, Dog grumbled but chose not to continue his lecture. Instead, he lowered his gaze back to the geometry textbook that lay before him. As Dog read, his eyes, glowing a bloody red, focused intently on the text. Lines, shapes, and mathematical symbols seemed to dance in his abyssal mind, coming together to form complex geometric structures. Amid these formations, a flickering red light and a series of glowing points arranged in a matrix emerged, flashing intermittently. It was at that moment that Shirley felt something strange. Quickly lifting her head, she looked towards Dog, who seemed to abruptly snap out of his trance. Springing up several meters into the air, the hound shouted, "Holy smokes!" In a turbulent flashback, Shirley found herself catapulted into the air by her chain on the weather-worn deck of a ship. Tossed about like a helpless rag doll, she landed on the splintering wooden planks with a resonant thud. Scrambling up in a frenzy of disoriented movements, she dashed towards Dog, gripping his skull and shaking it with urgent concern. What just happened to you? You looked so different for a moment there. Her young face was marred by lines of worry and confusion. Stunned by Shirley's vigorous shake, Dog struggled to regain his mental footing. I'm not sure. He blurted, visibly unsettled. Something flashed before my eyes, something I couldn't quite grasp, and then vanished before I could even process it. But I swear, I'm okay now. Nearby, who was engrossed in nibbling her French fries, cocked her head to the side and looked at Dog. Remote server not responding, please check your internet connection, she said in a tone laden with curiosity. Dog was visibly perplexed. What? I flapped her wings dismissively and sauntered away, mumbling to herself in an indecipherable blend of human and avian speech. Need to top up some Q coins. How about getting a monthly pass or a season subscription? Shirley waved her hand to shoo away I's distractions, turning her attention back to Dog. Ignore her, she's got less focus than a hummingbird on caffeine. Are you sure you're alright? You didn't short-circuit your brain from too much math or something? With a confused shake of his skull, Dog responded, as far as I'm aware, abyssal demons don't fry their brains, if we even have brains, to begin with. After conducting a thorough visual and spiritual inspection, Shirley couldn't identify anything amiss with Dog. All right, it looks like you're fine, she said, visibly relieved yet maintaining an air of caution. Deciding to brush off the inexplicable occurrence, Dog resumed his engagement with the math book, starting from where he'd left off. Shirley, however, remained vigilant, her hand hovering near her chain, ready to pull it at the slightest hint of anything abnormal. Fortunately, the rest of the study session progressed without any further disturbances, culminating in Dog effortlessly solving the last problem. Tossing his pen aside with a triumphant grin, Dog met Shirley's eyes. See? Told you I'm perfectly fine, he said, his voice tinged with a reassuring confidence. However, his gaze soon meandered towards a nearby barrel. Shirley, you've yet to complete your homework. Her face contorted into an elongated groan. Shirley clearly expressed her distaste for the reminder. Dog could only chuckle, shaking his head as he returned his attention to his math book. Although he was mostly certain that he was okay, a sliver of doubt clung stubbornly to his thoughts. He'd glimpsed something, not another abyssal demon summoned by the book, but something entirely different, more arcane, and utterly mystifying. What in the world had he seen?